Okay, shalom everyone. January 6th, 2025. Welcome to a new secular year. This is Parshat Vayehi, last Parsha in the book of Breshit. I looked at the record of my classes. We have one from 2021 looking at the scene of Joseph, Jacob blessing Joseph. That's a fascinating one. But I'm going to look at, kind of wanted to refresh here. We've been off for a couple of weeks, um, and go into just this is kind of like an analysis of how we do analysis, or an examination of how I look at a text, um, and then specifically focus on a motif, a very important motif within the story, within literature and movies in general, and a way to get us to appreciate that. I often like to say, part of the problem of studying the Bible is that we think we know it, and part of the problem of studying the Bible is that we think that we're smarter than those the world from which it emerged, knowing nothing about that world and knowing nothing really about the process of how the Bible came into being. And if we just make one little assumption, which is that the Bible emerges after not decades of process, but centuries of development of literature and language, and that how it probably moves from oral literature to something written, and then even when it's written and put down by scribes, it's assembled in a way that every single word has to be attended to. And so what we have here is a text that is trying to summarize the life of Jacob and summarize the life of Joseph and summarize and it's aware, the text itself is aware of itself as a that it is coming, that an era is coming to close, an era is coming to a close. Sorry about this. I don't know why that's here. Just boom. No, there we go. That an era is coming to closure, and so if you have that self-awareness, that you know, it means that you are going to tell your story differently. Now there cannot be anything more evident about an era coming to a close than death, right? A death, especially a death of a pivotal person, a family matriarch or a family patriarch. Uh, I'm assuming that many of us, if not all of us, have experienced something under that order of magnitude in the loss of family figures, principals in the family, namely parents, grandparents, etc. And which we will say as a kind of framing trope, uh, an era has come to its conclusion. This is the end of an era. I can't tell you how many times I've said that in eulogies, and I mean it. It's all true, even though we're still living in an era for that particular family or an individual. An era is coming to a close, and so I think there is a self-awareness when you are standing with someone who is dying, that this is the close of an era. This happens also in politics. Uh, I can't help but make reference to the fact that just an hour ago, the Prime Minister of Canada announced that he was going to step down, and we can reserve our comments on that, except for the very basic one, which is to note that it is the end of a certain political era, right? And this is an auspicious day in the American calendar, and in a week, in 14 days or so, there will be, a transition and end of era. It's a political era. We could also note, for example, I didn't comment on it in any kind of public setting. So last week, the passing of Jimmy Carter at the age of 100, that the various ceremonies that are going to take place throughout the course of this week. I think the funeral is on January 9th, which was Thursday. And so many people will use that kind of framing and say, this is the end of an era. How they define that era and how they define what that means, I think will be very, very interesting. Um, you know, in terms of just the analysis is, was Jimmy Carter a pivotal, transitional, transformational, etc.? Those are questions that we'll leave for another time. Notwithstanding the fact that significant life, of course, 100 years, significant age, a century, and a figure in American politics that obviously had some significance and whose effect, at the very least, lasts to this day, at least as far as we're concerned, with the Camp David Accords, which still sustain the relationship between Egypt and Israel, notwithstanding that it is a cold peace and not the warm peace that we all envisioned. All I'm saying is that this is a motif, and this is a trope, and this is an idea, and that a narrator telling a story is going to kind of, the more effective the narrator is, the more the narrator is going to allude and echo all sorts of other things. So let's go right into the text, and I'll show you how that is happening. And I just saw a hand go up there. Go ahead there, Nanette. Unmute yourself and go ahead. Unmute. I can't hear you.
Okay. So before you get into the text, I want to just make sure I understand what you're saying, Rabbi. So you're saying don't focus on the interpersonal relationships. Like, for example, what I might think about Judah and Joseph. You're saying focus on the big picture?
Well, I'm saying for this class especially, well, I wanted to focus on the text and show you that I'm interested in looking at how the text tells a story. It's I think that here we are. We're not reading this. We're reading it to get some insight into how the Torah tells the story that the Torah is trying to tell, which is, I know it's a kind of complicated way to say this, but I'll just say, we all are, I think, rather sophisticated in terms of how we encounter story, narrative, music, movies, etc. I'm sure many of you, have been to maybe, it's a pastime of every you watch a movie or go to a movie, and part of the joy or the enjoyment of it is asking a question about how the teller of the tale, how the director itself is going to shape the movie and how it's going to tell the story. I'll give you just an example because I enjoyed watching the movie about Bob Dylan. So this is a movie. I think you should all see it. It's a really significant part of popular culture, and it's something that people can relate to. It's a great performance. And what I'm saying is that the director is choosing certain things to tell you in the movie. We don't have to be movie critics. We don't have to be, we just have to be a little literate and ask, well, why did he choose this scene? Why did he choose this thing? Why did he choose this thing, this angle? And maybe why is he choosing this frame? And all of that makes for the enjoyment of the movie, um, and in a way that just by seeing it, it wouldn't occur to us. Okay, and I think that most of us have that kind of literacy where we are going to interact with a story, a piece of literature, a movie, etc., on many, many levels at the same time. So what I'm saying here is, aside from the very, very valid, question, which is what are the relationships going on here, and that's really, that's what kindles our emotional response to these stories, because we can literally all see ourselves in these stories. I mean, as I mentioned, most of us have had these experiences of life where we are next to a person at the end of their lives. These are not particularly joyful experiences, but they are part of our human experiences, and we tend to remember those moments. We tell those moments. They're part of our narrative. They're part of, what emerges following the death of a person. They are fresh in our minds. The last things that people say, and they become part of the way that we narrate these things. And so, and if we were to be artists about it, we would be careful in terms of the way we choose words or colors or paints or whatever pictures, the way we would do it. That's what's happening here. So what I'm pointing to is, and here I'm going to put the text up, that the text itself is going to is doing this for us by making references to other things. So these are the first. Just look at the first. These are the first six verses, four verses of the Parsha, and I've highlighted things here that as part of like an exercise. I would say if we were a first year, second year, university's class on the Bible, I would have this as an exercise, which is find all of the different associations of these particular verbs, phrases within other parts of Genesis, and then answer the question, what is going on here? What is it telling us? It's an exercise, but it's a literary exercise that is trying to say to us, we're coming to the end of the book. We're coming to the end of an era. We're coming to a transition, and our ear is being tuned by the narrator here to allude to other things. So the text goes as follows: Vayechi Yaakov be'eretz Mitzrayim. Now I've given away some of the game here by highlighting some of these texts. Vayechi Yaakov be'eretz Mitzrayim. Yaakov lived in the land of Egypt, Shiva Esrei Shana, for 17 years. Vayehi Yamei Yaakov Shnei Chayav Shiva Shanim V'Arba U'Ma'at Shana. And the days of Yaakov, the years of his life, were 7 years and 147 years. I didn't highlight what I wanted to highlight. Vayikravu Yemei Yisrael Lamut. Israel's days drew near to death. Vayikra Livno Yosef. He called his son Joseph. Vayomer Lo. He said to him, Imna matzati chen menecha, if I have found favor in your eyes, simna yadcha tachat yerechi, put your hand under my thigh, vasita imadi chesed ve'emet. Excuse me, deal with me in loyalty and faithfulness. Al na tikbereni b'Mitzrayim. Do not bury me in Egypt. V'shechavti im avotai, let me lie down with my fathers. Unisatani mimitzrayim, carry me out of Egypt. Ukvartani b'kfuratam, bury me in the burial site. Vayomar, anochi aseh kidvarecha, I will do according to your words. That's what Joseph says. Vayomer, but Jacob said to him, Hishava li, swear to me. Vayishava lo, so he swore to him. Vayishtachu Yisrael arosh hamitah, then Israel bowed at the head of his bed. Then Israel bowed at the head of the bed. It's a profound, profound, important scene, okay? And you can see how compressed it is. The narrator has done this in, I don't know, maybe less than 100 words. It's what, two, three, four verses, and we have a whole scene here. We have a whole scene now, just outside of the text, I'm just going to ask, just going to, shape it and say, what is Jacob worried about, and why doesn't he want to be buried in Egypt? And what's going on here? I guess back to Nanette's question. What's going on here interpersonally? Which is what's the scene about? The scene is the man is dying. Okay, we've established that, and he knows he's going to die. What's interesting? He has all his marbles. He has all his wits about him. That's very significant. And he wants to direct the story, okay? And he is the patriarch, and his son is the vizier, regent, vice regent, prime minister, whatever you want to call it, of Egypt, a man of political power. Jacob is a man of patriarchal power, which means he is going to be, for all intents and purposes, the last one with whom God speaks in a certain way. God does not speak to Joseph in direct communication. That is to say, God said to me, Lech Lecha, like God said to Abraham. God speaks maybe to Joseph in dreams. God will speak, of course, to Moses later on, but we'll leave that for next week and for another time, right? God obviously has, relationships with other personalities in the prophetic, but the patriarchal relationship is ending. So we have one archetype, which is the patriarch, and another archetype, which is the son, or also the political figurehead that is Joseph. And what emerges, immediately in the scene for me, and I can't help but think about it in this way, which is you have the father saying to his son, "Don't bury me here, bury me in Egypt." Let's talk about that for a second. I'm sorry, bury me in Canaan. What's that about? What, how do you react to that? What's that about? Don't bury me. Go ahead, Nanette.
Me? Okay.
Yes.
So I have three answers for you. I'll be short. Number one, the obvious. There's a famine coming, or maybe it came already. He doesn't want to be involved. Number two, I read in Stone Humash that he knew that the locusts were coming. He knew that the Jewish people were going to be slaves, and he didn't want to have his bones there.
Okay. You don't want to be picked off by the locusts. Okay. I guess. All right. You muted again. All right. So yes, okay. Those are plausible. I think of just the even more obvious, which is I'm sorry to say I spent a lot of time in cemeteries because I officiate at funerals and stuff, and so it's just a human impulse. The human impulse to give someone a proper burial. It's a cultural impulse. It's also, I think, deeply rooted in what it means to be a human being, that a person goes to a certain place, and that part of, the culture that we don't even have the tools to access in terms of the way we encounter this, that we always want to be with someone and be connected to someone, even in death, even in death. When the Torah says in other places he was gathered into onto his kin, that means so much on different levels, right? To be gathered onto a kin means, we and everybody says this. I mean, it is so common, that we don't even I don't even want to call attention to it because it's just part of our the way we talk, which is when someone passes away, that they say, now he is with da 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 da. Now they are with their next of kin who has also passed away. That's just common. In fact, I think that it's a tremendous amount of comfort for people. I give you all sorts of examples from the most recent passings in the congregation to even, I mean, yesterday I was present at a funeral and that was said. Now she is with da 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 da. And far be it for me, for anyone to say at that moment, well, to be cynical or critical, is that what's happening? How do you know? We don't know. What do we know? Nothing. We know nothing. And wouldn't it's very harsh to say to someone, well, there's no proof of that. How do you know? I mean, how many times have I heard people say, now they're up there, they're playing golf together. Now they're at their kid, they always I use these expressions myself in kind of a humor. I talk about Now they're in the upstairs shul. The ups, you know, I when I look out at the shul on Yontiv on Yisker, you know, I'm here now 30 years, so there are a lot of people that are no longer present in the shul that we loved and that we were all related to. And for a moment, you close your eyes and you go like, well, what are they doing now? Well, they're in shul. You know, so I get a laugh out of it. But I also get comfort out of it. I hate to say, I mean, I want to say it in the way that is most authentic, genuine, and sensitive and emotional, which is I get comfort out of the fact that on some reality, we're all together. Bob, go ahead.
Your question, I'd offer two responses about not being buried in Egypt. One was his testing Yosef as to whether he's acculturated to become more Egyptian or still staying within the Jewish spiritual tradition in terms of following through. And the second would be that he wouldn't want his gravesite to become a shrine that people would come to worship him, per se, and that move away from a more monotheistic view.
Correct. Both of those are great tangents to go on, great lines of inquiry, you know, and it's a theme that does run through these stories. Joseph, you know, as I want to say the archetype paradigm model of the assimilationist. Joseph, no longer the shepherd, no longer in the shepherd. I mean, every depiction that we have of Joseph by you know, famous artists, he's wearing regal clothes, he's wearing a regal headdress, he's, you know, very Egyptian down to the toenails, okay? And you know, this is Jacob's way of saying, in the inimitable way that he is saying it, you're a Jew. I mean, it's anachronistic to say that, okay? But he's saying, who do you belong to? Do you belong to Canaan or do you belong to Egypt? Are you going to be part of this culture? Are you going to be part of that culture? And I'm going to lob this one to you, Bob. What's Joseph's answer himself at the end of his life? Right? How does Joseph answer it himself? Go
He
ahead.
doesn't want to be buried there either.
He doesn't want to be buried there, which is so fascinating because at the end of the parsha, he says this to the brothers, and my reaction to this, as many, is of course, you know, he's echoing his father by saying, I want you to promise me that you're not going to bury me here because I want to go back to Canaan. So on the one hand, it's wow, look at this. You know, he's so loyal to his family and loyal to his father, and he's making himself now the continuity, the thread of continuity between the patriarchal story and the Exodus story. And if you follow this to its continuity, you see that, you know, we'll point to it in Exodus. You know, when they take when they go out of Egypt, Moses himself takes the bones of Joseph out from Egypt, and Moses himself is carrying the bones of Joseph all the way through the desert to the land of Canaan, to the land of Israel. And it's not until the end of the book of Joshua that they bury the bones of Joseph. So, you know, what's happening there, both thematically and literarily, is well, Genesis is being connected to Exodus, is being connected to Joshua, all through the very literal bones of Joseph. And the patriarchal stories are being connected to the story of the conquest. And that's what Joseph is trying to do. One second. And the other thing I would say is that, you know, Joseph, this is where I could be very critical of Joseph. You know, come on. You've been differentiated from your brothers forever now. You're the king, you're like the most powerful person in Egypt. And now it's as if you were saying, I'm going to be buried in Canaan and no one else is going to be buried in Canaan, right? I want the privilege of being buried there, and I do not and you brothers, you can do whatever you want, but I want you to promise me that you're going to bury me. So my reaction to that is I have a reaction to that. Who do you think you are? I have a stronger reaction, but what the brothers should have said to Joseph at that point. But they're kind, and they know that Joseph has power over them, so they agree. Alana, go ahead.
It's not only that they want to be buried at home.
Yes,
Uh, they want to be buried with their father, with their parents,
sure,
with their
sure,
families, and
sure.
I guess together in life, together in
It
death.
does. I'll tell you, how very it's very painful to make reference to the current situation, but this is part of the anguish, and I know that many people can connect to this. Part of the anguish that is being experienced by the families of the hostages, especially those who they know for a fact are not alive. There are families who know that they're not going to get their loved ones alive. But the fact that they are somewhere in Gaza and that they don't know where they're buried is causing immeasurable pain to them. It's torture on top of torture on top of torture. And so what you hear Israelis say, and this is, very, it's a phrase throughout Jewish history, Kvurat Israel. They should be buried b'Kvurat Israel. That is to say that bringing home the bones, the literal body of murdered Jews, and giving them a proper Jewish burial is, well, it's not total comfort, but it's a huge comfort for them. You know, when we say Hamakom Yenachem Etchem, there's a beautiful pun on Hamakom Yenachem. Hamakom is a reference to God. We say, may God comfort you. Hamakom Yenachem Etchem B'toch Shar V'lei Tzion V'Yerushalayim is a standard Ashkenazi phrase. May God comfort you among the mourners of Zion and Jerusalem. It's a little, complicated phrase we've talked about in the past. Hamakom is reference to God, but Hamakom literally means place. And a person, Rabbi Jack Reimer wrote a very important eulogy or essay on this. He says, it's not only God that gives comfort, aval hamakom yinachem. Having a place of comfort gives you having a place gives you comfort. When I get into conversations, sometimes they're not arguments but debates about cremation and why is cremation not acceptable in Jewish law. And we don't have to get heated about it now, but one of the arguments is that not when you cremate, you can take the ashes and you can take them anywhere and throw them anywhere, and you don't have a place to go. You really don't have a place to go, unless of course you bury the cremains, they're called, and that is often done as well. But we do not practice that. But part of Jewish burial is not about the dead, it's about the living. And the living are able to go to a place, and then it is the connection to the place that gives them some kind of comfort. Part of the the trauma inflicted on the Jewish people after the Holocaust was that for 6 million Jews, there is no place. Elie Wiesel famously visited Belsen, and with Oprah Winfrey, his last visit, or was it to Auschwitz or Belsen, and in the very cinematic way, television Oprah way, he says to Oprah, "This is the last time I'm coming here. You're on my last visit. And when I go, I visit the sky because that's where my father is. I visit this part of sky. That's you know, what does that even mean? Okay. It's impossible you can't make that into a concrete statement, okay? And he's intentionally making it into an abstraction because he's saying, by visiting sky, he says, I'm visiting nothing. There's no grave to my father, right? And so I come here to visit the last place that he walked on the earth, if you could say that, okay? But I have no comfort, and for many people for whom there is no grave, there is no comfort. And that's what's happening. So he says, Al natik pareni b'Mitzrayim. He makes him swear an oath, and we're going to look at that text in a second. Now we'll look at the different references textually. Okay, here we go. Any other questions here? Okay, no. All right. So here I'm going to say Vayehi Yaakov. Okay, So I did a little bit of highlighting of Yaakov lived. Okay, he lived. Where do we see that? Vayechi. For whom else we have the term? For whom do we learn from that? Okay, so I have a tool for that. I will show you in a second. This is how we do this search. Okay, watch this. Studying the Torah today is much is there, there's it. I don't want to say more fun, but there are all sorts of things that enable us to do this. This is a I'm very proud of this website called Al HaTorah. I have talked about Sefaria also. These are tools that I use for studying the Torah. It's a very wonderful tool, and at the end of the year, I gave them a little donation. And since they're run by a couple of people, they sent me a lovely note, and I want to just highlight that. So, what is it? They computerized the entire Torah, which is not too difficult, and the entire Tanakh, and a lot of other important, primary sources. There are a number of websites that do this now. One that we've talked about in the past called Sefaria, but here, so this is Concordatia. I looked up where it says Vayechi, okay? And if I click it, this is all 33 times that it occurs in the book of Breshit, this term, Vayechi. Notice I have you covered, but on the right side here, where I'm scrolling up and down, this is all the time that we have the root chaya, chayim, different forms of that word in the book, in the entire Tanakh. Okay, so there are 285 times that occurs in the whole Tanakh. If I click this, I'll show you that this is all the times that the form of this word occurs in the entire Bible. You notice that there are 59 times that chaya occurs in the book of Breshit. But I'm gonna go to Vayechi, okay? Vayechi, and we're back to 33 times in Breshit. If I click that bar, I get all the times that Vayechi occurs in the book of Breshit. Here's the first one, Vayechi Adam. Adam lived. Can you all see this? You're all seeing this properly? You give me a thumbs up, yes? You all see what I'm talking about? Everybody? Yeah, you got it. Okay. So Vayechi Adam, Adam lived, Vayechi Shet, Vayechi Enosh. These are all from the beginning of the book. And we go through the genealogy, Chanoch, Metushelach, Lemech, and all of these important people. And then the last one that we get in this list is Vayechi Terach. Okay? Terach lived 70 years, Vayolad and Abraham and Nachor and Haran. And then the next one, the very next occurs is Yaakov. Okay? So I'm just talking from the narrator's point of view. If you're a narrator and you're writing a book and you use a word, you're choosing the word, and you're lighting up, you know, in the panel, all of these recollections of where it is, and what that signals to the listener is something very simple, which is I'm putting a bracket, a symmetry on the end of the story from the beginning. At the beginning of the book, the word occurred, in the first, I don't know, the first 12 chapters of Genesis, the word occurred 32 times. Okay? And here's the 33rd time. So what you are saying here is the story is coming to a close. That's Vayechi. Okay? That's that one. Let me close this, and we'll go to the next one. I'll show you. Here we go. Microsoft Word document 12. Boom. Shiva Esrei Shana. This is a little more specific here. Okay. So the question I would ask is, where else do we have the idea of 17 years? Jacob lived in Egypt 17 years. Well, the story starts out with 17 years. This one I've talked about in the past. Yaakov settled in the land of his father, sojourning in the land of Canaan. These are the beginnings of Yaakov. Yosef, 17 years old, used to tend the sheep with his brothers. So you could say, what is the narrator's purpose in telling us Joseph's age there? Well, I'm going to close the screen for a second and say the narrator's purpose in telling us Joseph's age is to establish a timeline of Joseph's life. Okay. Is 17 a significant number? 17 probably is a significant number in the symbolic sense. I just haven't figured out what it is. I could say, well, it's 10 plus 7. 7 is significant, 10 is significant, therefore 17 is significant. And we've seen 17 as a number in the Noah story, and we see it elsewhere in the Tanakh as well. But here, he's 17 years old. What does that mean? So he's an adolescent. He's really a post-adolescent, even though adolescence as a category is a kind of anachronism in antiquity. And we modern people, uh, that is to say, we have an awareness of adolescence in a way that ancient people do not. I think ancient people went from childhood to adulthood without any kind of real recognition that there was a real transitional phase that took place over several years. The very fact that we have a status, milestone called bar mitzvah, which is deeply rooted in antiquity in Judaism, tells us that you move from legal childhood to legal adulthood, and that there's no real, legal definition to the period in between of childhood and adulthood. The I don't want to say adolescence is an invention, but adolescence, is the awareness of adolescence is something modern through modern medicine, right? Now, of course, it would have been intuitive to observers, of children in antiquity that a child simply didn't wake up, at 13 and had all sorts of characteristics of adulthood, and that you grew into adulthood as either as a male or a female over the course of several years. Uh, they wouldn't, precisely because adolescence is so difficult to pin down. They didn't pin it down. I have a pediatrician friend who says, we had this conversation. He was the head pediatrician at Machane at the camp, Ramah, and we were talking about adolescence and kids because camp is where you experience this in real, right in front of you, and of course teachers who teach middle school are seeing this daily, okay, in all of its glory, okay. These are really extraordinary years in a child's life. So I asked him, I said, what's happening with puberty and adolescence? And he said, children are entering puberty and adolescence earlier than ever before in history. Why is that? So I'm not a physician, so I say, was it because of social media? Is it because of exposure? Is it because of... And he said, no, it's not any of that. It's nutrition, health, basic health and nutrition. We are much healthier as a society than ever before in human history. And so the body's cues for beginning the process start earlier because we're healthier. Okay. So it's not uncommon, especially, as a physician, to see young girls at the age of 9 or 10, even earlier, and sometimes there's an attempt to delay it because of the social ramifications of having to be that kid that hits puberty at an early age. So 17 is that, okay, but 17 is symbolic because it's a period of Jacob's life. It's the period of life where he had his son. 17 is the period of life at the end of his life where he had his son. So what we're doing as literature is we're saying these are the brackets of Jacob's life. That I think is something that may have been obvious to people. Okay, we'll go on. And so we have this expression with regard to Sarah's age, Yemei Shnei Chayei Sarah, right? Sarah's life, Yemei Shnei Chayei Ishmael, Ishmael's life. And you've heard me, and you may, and then, but there's a specific reference, Jacob, when the narrator is tying us back to something in the immediate past, which is this scene where Jacob meets Pharaoh. Okay, and I have the text here. I'll keep the text up in a second. Pharaoh said to Jacob, Yaakov, how many are the days and years of your life? And he said to him, "V'yomer Paro, yemei shnei megurai shloshim u'ma'at shana, my days are 130 years. Me'at v'ra'im, few and bad are the years of my life. Lo hisigu et yemei shnei chayei avotai. I did not reach the age of my fathers." Okay, so what that tells us is that the narrator is cueing us back to this this remarkable moment where Jacob meets Pharaoh, and you know, I have this debate as to whether or not it's an older pharaoh or a younger pharaoh. I On this go around, I presented in shul that I believe that Pharaoh is not much older than Joseph. That Pharaoh may be. We can't think of Pharaoh as a parental figure. We should think of Pharaoh as a kind of older sibling figure to Joseph, notwithstanding the fact that it's so tempting to go, to have Pharaoh, Joseph adopt Pharaoh as his symbolic adoptive father. Okay, but it seems to me that Pharaoh is a younger man, not as wise, and is going through a course of development here. And when he encounters Jacob, he is encountering an old man. Now, you know, we could say that's a conversation that even older people would have with older people, right? Even an older person would ask an older person, "How old are you?" But it seems to me that, if you are of one generation and you see a positively ancient human being in front of you, the first thing out of your mouth would be, "How old are you? How old are you?" And Jacob responds in a way that is so idiosyncratic. He says, it's almost you want to kind of, he's like an old Jewish man here. Oh, the years of my life are 130. I didn't reach the age of my fathers. I didn't reach the age of my fathers. But there, so you have him, at this age, and he is considerably younger than his fathers. Okay, and here we go. His grandfather lived till 175, and his father lived till 180, and he lives till 147. And all of this is a code. I've mentioned this before, but I delight in mentioning this. 180, 6 squared times 5. I'm sorry, 175, 5 squared times 7. That's Abraham. Isaac, 180, 6 squared times 5. Jacob, 147, 7 squared times 3. So it's 5 squared times 7, 6 squared times 5, and 7 squared times 3. 5, 6, 7, and 7, 5, 3 as multiples. So what is that saying to you? So I get tremendous delight in sharing that little observation, because it says in a kind of wink wink way, the Torah is winking to you in a decipherable code order, a sense of chronological order. And the theological conclusion from that is, ah, there's a God who is organizing human history in epochs in ways that if you just do a little bit of kind of, analysis with, some elementary arithmetic, you can figure it out. You don't need to be a PhD in in anything. You can just know one or two things about the way the world works, and you can see that there is an ordered structure to the very chaotic narrative that is moving down. And when Jacob, says, "I haven't reached the age of my fathers," it's true, because the numbers don't add up. Okay. So on the one hand, the numbers don't add up. And the biblical author had to deal with a problem. Okay, I'll make it just as elementary as possible, which is if you're figuring out an ordered universe based on the formula that I've presented, 5 squared times 7, 6 squared times 5, 7 squared times 3, okay, then the numbers are going to go down. Okay, what would be next in the line? Okay, this is an SAT question. The next in the line would be if you have 5, 6, 7 squared, so then it would be 8 squared times 1, which is 64. Is there anybody in the Bible that's 64? 1 second. So I can't, I'd have to look that. I don't know. It doesn't matter. It stops. The reason why it stops is because this is a pattern. And so the theology has to, and the character has to kind of fit into the model, and the way the character fits into the model is he says, I'm 40 years short of my father or my grandfather, right? And woe is me for that, right? And I'm sorry to say this, but who among us doesn't think this way in terms of the way we relate to the age of our parents, right? Many of us have in our own minds, a kind of psychological flashing, bulb here when we either reach the age of our parents or surpass the age of our parents. It's a tremendously emotional lodestone. I'll give you one example. Okay, I encountered this in Montreal when my first pulpit, where a father of a bar mitzvah was coming to me because he had tremendous anxiety. It's such a great story. Tremendous anxiety. His son was becoming bar mitzvah, and he couldn't deal with it. He couldn't deal. So I started talking to him. I said, "So tell me about your how you grew up. Tell me about your bar mitzvah." And he said, well, my father died 3 days before my bar mitzvah. So you go. And so you're anxious about your son's bar mitzvah? It's pretty obvious what you're anxious about. If your own father, I mean, I don't have to be Joseph or Stanley. I'll get your advice in a second here, but I don't have to be a therapist here to really understand what you're worried about. You're worried you're going to die, the day after your son's bar mitzvah. So I said to him, "It doesn't look like you're going to die. Okay, we're gonna you look healthy. We're gonna but I see what's bothering you. I really see what's bothering you. You're worried you're not going to make it. And this was obviously such a traumatic event in your childhood that it's appearing to you now, and you're going to be okay." And that's what he needed to hear. You're going to be okay. It's going to be fine. You're going to get through it. And he thanked me, and it was really one of the most remarkable moments. And he would go on, and I'm sure he's having a good life. But the point is that many people have a kind of number flashing in their head because that's the age of their parents, that's the age of and so if they only have to, they're either reaching that as a goal or surpassing that as a goal. And those who have people who live to a long life, will have that. Here I mentioned Jimmy Carter. So Jimmy Carter died at 100, so I look at Amy or whoever, he has a couple other children, right? And you wonder, like, you think, longevity is, there are so many reasons, that account for a person's longevity, including genes, genetics, and all that. Yeah, you wonder, whether or not they have this pressure on them that they have to live a long life. I don't know if I have people here that can relate to that. Stanley, I mentioned you, so I'm going to turn to you. What did you think? First of all, as a therapist, what did you think? How did I do?
First of all, I agree with the general tenor of what you're saying, but I think you asked just the right question and you did a brilliant job. You were, of course, practicing psychology without a license,
Sure.
but I won't tell anyone that. But you
Okay,
did
good.
really, you were spot on with that, and I'll bet it did relieve his anxiety to
Absolutely,
some
100%.
extent. because, and I see this all the time, people come in, they don't know why it is, they're depressed or anxious or whatever, and you sort of get them to talk and it comes out, which they somehow seem surprising that they wouldn't know this or understand this, but
Right.
often they don't because they're either repressing it or they don't remember or who knows what. So this was, I think, you did
Yeah,
a great job.
it's funny, I often will turn to when I have a conversation on something like that, I'll often turn to the calendar. If someone comes in, they're remarkably, puzzled by something or upset or whatever. And I'll say, is there anything, did anything happen to you at this time of the year? Or is the month of December, January important in your life, And often, people don't realize it that hovering, beneath the surface are things of awareness. Now, of course, it may be illusory correlation. It may be an illusion to correlate things that may not necessarily be correlated, but they do correlate on a symbolic level.
This is, I just have to say, this
Yeah.
is a well-known phenomenon. It's called the anniversary reaction.
Yeah, anniversary
And
reaction,
people may
absolutely.
not recognize it. But if you
Absolutely.
tap into that, they say, they sort of are startled and recognize that
And
that's what they're.
I just want to say it's interesting, in Judaism, we have the yort site comes out of a deep theological or deep psychological emotional need. We mark yort sites in a way that many cultures and religions do not. It's a date on the calendar. And if you're part of a synagogue community, you'll get a letter, you'll get a reminder, one second, that says, the yort site of your loved ones coming, da, da, da. And there's a way to commemorate it. You light a candle, come to shul, say Kaddish, etc., etc. And so you're keyed into that. Nanette, go ahead. You've been waiting. Go ahead.
So, hey, Rabbi. So this is a question for you and for Stanley. So it seems to me that there's a deep, a very specific correlation between religion and emotion. So what I'm asking you could there be connection between the fact that so many Jews are similar, so many Jews really have walked away from religion, and maybe it's too emotional for them?
Well, it's a large question, and it's a cultural question in terms of how, of course, large questions mean that there's no one single answer. These are cultural, we have a cultural moment where in general in the culture people have turned away from all sorts of things that challenge them, in terms of their beliefs. People have vested a lot of their meaning in politics, for example, and sport and entertainment and other kinds of areas of the culture and it's not one thing. Okay, emotion is a huge part of it, but if you were to have this conversation with anybody, person that you know, about why they are not affiliated or not joined or not connected, you might get a set of answers. I happen to believe, and this is my own private, belief that I'm making public here, which is that a lot of people with regard to their Jewish, they're just uncomfortable about things that Jewish affiliation and Jewish religion kind of ask of you when you come into a community, right? And when you come into a community, it means that your life is not only yours anymore, and that everybody's part of your life. And we in America in this, in this particular era, we are mindful of the private boundaries of our lives, and this is not something that is easily overcome. And that's just one answer of a complicated question that has so many entry points. Go ahead, Bob.
I just wanted to echo Stanley's comments and endorse absolutely what you did with, your congregant and all that. As a family physician, before I retired, I was well familiar with anniversary reactions, whether based on dates or ages. And when I would collect family histories and genograms, when I had the time, I would ask those very questions, and I would sometimes pre-schedule visits because people would have flares of chronic medical problems,
No question.
mental health issues going on. So it's very well documented, and I think we don't spend enough time of the impact of the calendar on our bodies and on our mind.
Absolutely. It's huge. It's a huge, and it's not huge, it's also it's a use, I mean, it's a useful entry point into the soul, you know, because it's a fundamental experience, time and how we relate to time, you know. And you know what? It's so interesting. We'll be on this tangent for a second, you know. What really bothers us about the change in the climate. Okay, so today it's snowing, and you know, we are feeling a kind of, you know, natural response to the normal rhythm of nature. Okay, but do you know what really on some level it bothers people about global warming? It's that it's not what they grew up with, right? That, you know, you heard so many people say it's December. Where, you know, I didn't grow up a Hanukkah. You know, Hanukkah for us as Jews, right? What's Hanukkah for us? Hanukkah is sitting inside behind the window, watching the window fog up, right? As you light the candles and you see snow outside. And you know, what's Hanukkah? Hanukkah is getting a scarf and mittens for a present. Hanukkah is getting, you know, warm. That's what Hanukkah is to North American Jews who are in the north of North America. Okay. You know, and when you don't have that, you're missing part of who you are. And I think that on that, that's like the deepest level of this is forget, you know, yeah, of course it's huge, it's bigger than all of that. But on a practical, personal, emotional, what it ties to is something is not the way it used to be. And that's very unsettling for people. Okay. Any
One
other?
other thing on the number 17, I put it in there that the gematria of Vayehi is 17.
There you go. Okay.
For what
Okay.
it's worth, and these
It's
are some other
Vayechi.
references.
No, it's not. Vayechi is 27, 20. No, Vayechi is Yud is 28 plus 6. Vav is
Before,
18 plus 6 is 24. It's not 17.
cut it in half, right? So these are
Right.
two articles relating to that.
Okay. Okay. Good enough. Stanley, go ahead.
Well, it's just what you're saying. It reminds me that the best-selling record of all time is "I'm Dreaming of a White Christmas."
Sure.
So what you're saying about Jews and Hanukkah, Christians
Absolutely
and
true.
winter, same thing.
And you know what?
Written by a Jew.
I'm sorry, written by Jew.
What?
Not that I've
Written
had
by
conversations with my, you know, with neighbors, non-Jewish neighbors, but I am assuming if I were to have a conversation and say, "How did you feel about your Christmas this year?" They go, "Oh, man, you know, but something was missing. What was missing? The white, you know, snow, this, Staples, you know, all of that, that whole experience." And by the way, you know, John, on the fact that, you know, most of the there were a lot of podcasts on the Jewish composers of, you know, songwriters over the last, you know, few weeks, you know, more than one at least, who remark about how prevalent Jews were in writing the music for the holidays, eh, because Christmas is an American holiday, and you know, transition from being simply a Christian holiday to an American holiday, and that's a tension, you know, in Christianity, in terms of how, you know, Christianity functions within Christmas, and leave it to Jews to kind of conjure and shape the American experience of a holiday. And really it's an act of, you know, cultural kind of audacity, by saying, you know, on some level they're saying this belongs to everybody here. It's really a fascinating inquiry. Okay, last thing I
And
want
for
to,
that
yeah,
reason, if you listen to the words in those songs, it's not about Jesus and angels. It's
absolutely
about
not.
sleigh rides and chestnuts roasting on an open fire. It's very secular, in other words.
So the last thing, "Vayikrevu Yemei Yisrael," this is another phrase that we see with Jacob, Moses, and David. The Haftorah for this week is the deathbed of David. And then I wanted to just, you know, the oath that Jacob makes Joseph swear. that itself is a powerful moment. And I didn't even get to this, but I have this book in my library called Deathbed Wisdom of Hasidic Masters. Okay, it should not surprise us in the least that the deathbed story and the deathbed, you know, promise me that you'll do this is a very important trope. I'll just show you how I use ChatGPT and in these situations. I kept it up here for this. Okay, so watch, and it take another second here. Okay, so I asked ChatGPT. I said, "Do you have examples of deathbed scenes from movies or TV where the person dying makes the next of kin promise something? I am looking for similar scenes to Jacob and Joseph in Genesis 47:31." So here's how the AI answers this question. The trope of a deathbed promise is a powerful and emotional narrative device often used in movies and TV shows. Okay, here are some examples of deathbed scenes which the dying character makes a significant request or extracts a promise from their next of kin, which might be similar in tone or theme to the scene between Jacob and Joseph. The Godfather, okay? The Lion King, Les Miserables, Star Wars, Little Women, The Road, Braveheart, Biblical. And if I asked it, I could get a dozen more, I'm sure. And so what, as a I use these things as an encyclopedia and a dictionary and a resource, like the same way you would use a dictionary or go to the Britannica. It would have taken me literally 3 hours to collate, all of these different kinds of scenes and look for them. And I mean, it's embarrassing to say it. It came to me, this was maybe 2 seconds of computational power. Interestingly, I learned that the energy expenditure of a chat GPT search is orders of magnitude larger than a Google search. It takes 2 watt-hours of power to produce that answer, whereas Google search is, fractions of that, which only tells you as we use more AI, we're going to be using more and more electricity. That's a different topic. At any rate, so my point is that it's a theme, it's a trope, it's common here. Here, I'll just read you a two-line one. Rabbi Chaim Naftali Horowitz of Jikov died 1904. On his death, he said as following. He said before his death, "Master of the universe, it is revealed and known before you that I did not enjoy anything from this world." And with these words, his pure soul went out. He was released in 1904. Yeah, so he's saying, these are things that people say at their death, and some editor combined all of them from published literature, Hasidic literature. It's fascinating, how these things are all related back to primary stories, to archetypal stories, to that we have here. I can't tell you how many eulogies, how many, God forbid we should have to experience, going to a funeral during this week when this Parsha is read. But I guarantee for you, okay, if you find yourself in the circumstance where you're attending a funeral of a Jew given a eulogy by a rabbi this week, I would even bet with very, very strong, probability that the rabbi would choose this as the type scene for that. I've done it myself. I could say, it's just the lowest of the lowest hanging fruit on the tree. And you say, why do you use it? Because it's accessible to all of us, and we all relate to it. And that's what's going on here. And so what the narrator's doing is so skillful and so beautiful and so artful in the sense of connecting all of these different threads of Genesis, but also all the threads of our life. And that's what Torah study is all about. And that's what gives us tremendous joy when we study it and all the apparatus that we have. Go ahead, Bob.
I just want to say, since you brought up the Hasidic perspectives on some of this, if the other thing one of the things I read is that this is the first time in Tanakh that a grandparent gives a blessing to a grandchild.
Indeed, yes.
And the question there becomes not only what's going on currently, but what's the message for the future for the Jewish people in all these things going on. And so this transmission, as you're saying, at the and I mean, I think I read someplace that they said that Yaakov never died.
Indeed.
There's a whole discussion apparently about his legacy and everything else
Right.
living on. He drew his legs up and took his last breath, but there's no actual text saying that he died, right?
It doesn't say, it does not use the word vayamot, okay?
Right.
And so on that verse, which is later on in the Parsha, it says, Yaakov Avinu lo met. He didn't die. Now that's, there's the theology is exactly what you said, which is that there's an eternal presence of it. That's mythology in some ways. But what they're doing is they're saying, here's a textual problem, which we're going to layer on it the meaning of it, and then you get from that Od Avinu Chai, Od Avinu Chai. That's Shlomo Karlbach. We talked about this last week on our Parsha talk. When it says Am Yisrael, Am Yisrael, Am Yisrael Chai, Od Avinu Chai, our Father yet lives. And what is that really a statement of? It's a statement of eternity for the Jewish people. Not that Jacob actually lives, but Jacob lives through all of us. That's what it's saying. And that's what. Well, that's a good note to end on. I hope everyone has a good week, safe week, and look forward to seeing you all again next week. Some of us will be in person tomorrow. The women's class is tomorrow 10:30 in person at the shul. Okay.